So, just a quick bit from me. Who am I? I'm Stuart MOULD. I'm a product owner at CONDUKTOR. Mainly been working on data products over the last few years for large engineering organizations, but more recently I've been spending my time looking at Kafka proxies. So, before we get going into how you can squeeze the most from your data vast infrastructure, a little recap on a data maturity journey. On the left, we have a nice blue theoretical curve as you move through a more advanced organization, starting with ad hoc kind of things, moving to awareness, basic and advanced analytics use cases, and a data-centric organization. So you may hope that the more time you put in, the more value you get out. However, realities are often a lot more complicated. At first, the ad hoc stage, you may be working with only a few data sources. If some things break, you fix them. If you need some more, you just add them. The focus here is on collecting and storing your data. Challenges looking at quality, standardization, and new silos that are going to pop up everywhere. As you move into awareness, exec or management might start to become interested. Perhaps you've had the team come to you and tell you they want to be data-driven, but in reality, they're probably more likely data-informed. And budget may start to appear in the form of either higher prioritization or even financial. Documentation finally starts to appear. Focus here is on reporting, sharing, and collaborating across teams. And your challenges are to do with the culture change. Why now? Why is this important? Why do we have to go with streaming? What's wrong with batch? The third and penultimate stage that I'm seeing for these organizations is analytical. Here you may have dedicated teams or hires taking place. Transformations start to appear. Someone dares to say the words data science. And really the ownership of the data starts to happen. The focus here is you start influencing strategy, having input on KPIs, maybe forming some of the objectives and key results. But really, it's going to start asking questions. Who's allowed access to this data? Why are they allowed access? Perhaps there's some governance problems that are growing out of control, and quality requirements start making their way in, as well as costs starting to tick up. And finally, the dream, the data-centric organization. Data is really the core of the company, and everything they're doing is driven by data. Data mesh conversations are happening between architects and across teams, and data is seen as that really strategic asset now. Predictive and more advanced prescriptive use cases start to appear, and you're focusing on models, monetization, and dealing with those challenges of compliance. Ethical, are you really allowed to do this? And more advanced and even more cost optimization. So, the bit of today's talk is going to be focused towards the right-hand side of this curve. However, if you're more on the left, not to worry, you're about to hit a lot of these problems anyway. So what are the growing pains as you move along that curve? Firstly, the resource explosion. More things start to appear, and this is going to pull attention away from your core business activities. In conjunction with that, we've also got a bit of a talent pool problem that's worth addressing. So what is this fast talent pool problem? Streaming data is hard. It's not easy, or at least it wasn't for me getting into it. There's a steep initial learning curve, and there's lots of new concepts you've got to get to grips with, or you haven't really heard of before you start getting into this space. You may be dealing with a lack of formal training. Maybe you were just meant to get it and move into the next stage, or you've ended up inheriting someone else's bad architecture from before. Hiring's never that easy either. There's not enough talent out there. There's more job openings every day. And there's new tech to approach all the time. And why aren't we pulling this in? Do we need to explore this new piece of technology? And knowledge retention. Employees leave. The knowledge isn't always there in your teams, let's be honest. And even if you manage to give them the training, they can still leave anyway. Resource explosion. So there's more to do. There's more tables to create. There's more data to store. More runs to do. More sharing across teams. And none of these are immediately obvious. You can't just switch them off. Managed services are something that's really tempting to go for at first. To be honest, they're great. They're super helpful, but they can become expensive, especially as you start embedding them and doing more and more and becoming more successful, then the price curve starts to grow with you. A tool that people will often reach for is data duplication. This is an easy way to keep moving with what you want to do and performing analysis and sharing across teams, perhaps getting around some of that annoying governance or central teams are trying to make you do, especially around permission and authorization. Ultimately, though, this will lead to unclear ownership of that data. And what was the last one about divided attention? So your team that's been building this really core app is being pulled off. They're not able to do more of those core business activities, and the intention is being a way to fixing the pipeline, fixing that replication cluster that you've set up, fixing someone else's piece of work. And these deployments, when you end up upgrading, releasing your newest feature, your greatest piece of work, they're heavier, there's more to do, there's more, maybe we'll try automating. Oh no, the GitHub action's broken as well. And ultimately this makes it more fragile and slows down your velocity and your time to market. What this may also look like is trying something new can be really difficult. How much time are you given in your sprints for experimentation? Probably not very much. And as you start talking to more and more, you're going to have more customers, more random bugs internally, and this can really become quite a pain and a bit of a time sink. So none of that sounds very nice or very easy. But how might we tackle some of these problems? Some solution strategies that you can explore, I'm going to talk about, is simplification, virtualizing at scale, and scalable governance. Firstly, looking at simplifying your environment. So I mentioned earlier about data replication and how that's a common tool for us to be able to share things quickly across teams. But what this really leads to is unlimited bloat and a lot of mess. So looking at how might we simplify and curb down the cost explosion. One example we've seen with a few of our customers is sharing data with third parties. This is never simple, and you often have to talk to some people, and security are never going to let you directly plug in to the main cluster. So replicating a cluster again, it's that idea of sharing across teams, external teams. Perhaps you're looking at audience creation, external analytics services, lead generation, or just some simple audit and compliance here and there. The answer? Creating that secured, shared, safe space for people to interact with. Rather than replicating everything out, you might find clever ways to sync everything in on that virtual layer, that safe space. Another simplification step we can approach is reducing the number of integrations across your environment. For example, as we see with encryption sometimes, lots of teams may choose their own technologies to work with. They don't want to be prescribed by the central team. If you end up working with lots of different technologies, you end up with lots of different integrations to maintain. This can quickly become a complete maintenance nightmare. A matrix of technologies, versions. What are the ways you can reduce this down? Try and look for the common ground between each of these. Are they all speaking the same protocol? Is there something you can do there with a layer that's common across them? And that's where you can put your efforts in, reducing the need to maintain a much larger surface area. So I talked a little bit there about simplifying things down, reducing what we have to do for replication. But how might we virtualize to squeeze more from what's going on? Historically, VMware brought us the ability to virtualize machines, which was ultimately what got us to cloud computing today. This is great, but we normally now don't control those machines. So how might we virtualize the managed services that we're using that are hosting our machines? The answer? Squeezing more ROI from your service providers. So if you introduce an agnostic layer between yourself and your service providers, you bring back the flexibility to yourself. You're not totally reliant on their price structures, the certain limits you're allowed to do before that bill goes up or that quota isn't met. And this is something we've seen with our customers trying to do as well. Perhaps you have different service providers. Some might be offering lower prices, and you might look to move some data away from that expensive cloud provider that you're currently worrying about approaching the limit of. Might you be able to store some of your less critical, more complex data on a lower cost service provider? We might also look at squeezing more from each of those clusters. So teams often need their own space, their own environment. Maybe they're spinning something up for test and development, or perhaps they're running something that needs to just be torn down at the end. Ultimately, looking at multi-tenancy and virtualizing each of the safe spaces for each one allows you to increase your utilization on each of the backend Kafka clusters. Or other virtual resources in the background. Being able to create a virtual resource in front of this means you avoid conflicts and you're able to get more for your money. So I hope a few of you are familiar with Docker, but if you're not, it's a safe way to be able to run applications in different environments. Kubernetes brought us the ability to manage and scale this out, ultimately allowing us to squeeze more from the bare metal machines underneath. How might you take the same approach with putting virtual infrastructure on top of your physical infrastructure. Are there any ideas you can do for that? And then taking that a step further, how might you virtualize the next layer and the next layer? Where can you stop with your design solutions? Here you might be able to offer unified authentication, authorization, and really squeeze every little bit out of it. So we've simplified things down. We don't have to deal with as much. We found replacements for replication, and then we virtualized to get a lot more out of what's left. So now what remains, you've squeezed all of your population down to a much smaller space. That's going to need a bit more protection. There's a lot more to lose if this goes down. So how might we guard some of those packed virtualized resources? The answer is, again, with a virtual layer in there where you might integrate business rules. You might integrate data quality standards. You might be able to enforce best practices. So teams can often spin up the wrong name resources. It's not their problem, or they don't bother to tear them down. They just leave them on there for someone to deal with. You might also have teams who are not as experienced in the technology that you're dealing with and accidentally creating large resources that are totally unnecessary. Placing something in the middle, you might be able to, as the admin, the more experienced, you know what you're doing, but unfortunately your teams don't have all that knowledge as you do. Placing guardrails in place allows you to enforce down your experience and best practice from your teams without requiring them to all upskill to your level. However, this sounds great, but it's going to look like some kind of portal, support requests, and that team's going to get completely locked down with all the resource creation. Not necessarily. Allowing you to put those guardrails in place, you can set the size of those guardrails, the config of those guardrails. Maybe they're not allowed to create a large resource with 10 partitions, but they are allowed to create things up to 10 partitions. You might be able to enforce your best practice to do with replication factor or other common configurations. What we've seen with some of our customers is they're often working across 20 projects, and this is completely unrealistic for them to know and understand every support request coming in. And as they come in, they don't even know what some of the approvals they're being asked to do. What is this resource? Why do they need it? This can become a complete nightmare. How might you put a virtualization layer in between to support those requests? Maybe you've already got a portal in there. That's fine. You might be able to commit and make that virtualization layer work alongside your company portal to augment it. And finally, you might be able to look at who's pushing the limits on what's going on. You might be able to audit here, again, with a virtual layer, who's producing the most, who's consuming the most. Is someone disproportionately putting a lot of stress on those resources? You probably want to know who that is. You might want to talk to them, you might want to educate them, or just find out what they're doing. Being able to identify who the apps are who are putting all this stress on will be crucial to this. Or perhaps you want to do chargeback for certain parts of your business, different teams or different regions. So, I've talked today a bit about that data maturity journey and how we've moved up the curve and all the problems that might be happening as you start to hit the far right-hand side, and some approaches there on simplifying, virtualizing to get a lot more out of it, and then making sure you've got governance sufficiently to protect that really concentrated resource. So TLDR, introduce logical layers between your client applications and the backing resources that you can control and give yourself back the flexibility that might have been taken away from you. There's lots of technologies out there depending what you're looking to do. Like you've got PG Bouncer for your Postgres, NGINX, and Twilio. But for Kafka, that's something we do over in Conductor Gateway. So thank you very much for your time. And if you've got any Q&A, we'll be down at booth 210. I'd love to speak to you along with the rest of the team. Thanks very much.